Hello. Hello, everyone. Welcome. So nice to have the room so full on a Tuesday evening that everyone was convinced was going to be Mountain Day. 'Twas not. 'Twas not Mountain Day. Hi, I'm not Matt Donovan. And I know that many of you are expecting him, and I'm sorry. My name is Art Middleton. I have the luck and honor of getting to try and fill Matt's handsome shoes for this semester, teaching ENG 112 and getting to be a part of the reading series here. And I just want to give a quick bout of gratitude to Jennifer Blackburn and Matt Donovan for being so welcoming and supportive as I figure out how to do this, and especially to the wonderful Boutelle-Day Poetry Center crew, Rhea and Kylie this semester. Thank you for all you do. Yeah, let's just get started early with these. Okay, so thank you for being here with us, both in person and for the folks that are at home, and a special thank you to Tom Kleitus for supporting us and bringing this program virtually to those who couldn't be here tonight. This is the first reading of the fall semester program from the Boutelle-Day Poetry Center here at Smith, and we're so excited and honored to have Torrin A. Greathouse with us this evening, whose book, Deed, was just published this past month. Thank you especially to our supporting programs in bringing this programming to you, the Program for the Study of Women, Gender, and Sexuality, the Department of English Language and Literature, and the Accessibility Resource Center. You all made this event possible. And one more thank you here, and it's just a gratitude machine. Thank you to Broadside Books for giving us the opportunity to bring some of these words home with us tonight. And before I kind of go into what the order of operations for tonight is, I do just want to say one quick thing, because I don't get to introduce Torrin, and I just wanted to say really quickly about Torrin's work. I had the opportunity to take a workshop with Dorothy Allison 20 years ago. And for those of you that know Dorothy Allison's work, she thinks about class and the body and sex in very clear, attentive, vibrant ways. And I just remember her saying to us with a particular degree of seriousness, when you are writing, you do not know whose life you are going to save. And those are the stakes. And reading Torrin's writing in anticipation of tonight, hearing and getting to read some of our students' reflections on her work, that feeling was present for me, that here are the stakes. So I just wanted to say that really quickly, just as a way to set a tone maybe. So here's how tonight will work. We have a wonderful recent Smith graduate, M. Judkins, will be back to introduce Torrin. After her reading, Torrin will be in conversation with Professor Jina Kim, and then the two of them will be in conversation together, and the night will end with book signings if you are interested. So, this is the first event of the season, which means there is a lot ahead, and I want to quickly mention that coming up on Tuesday, October 8th, we have authors Jai Hamid Bashir and Jennifer Funk will be reading to celebrate the release of Bashir's Desire Halves, the inaugural chapbook from 9 Syllables Press, an incredible chapbook press that is just at its beginning, created in partnership with the Boutelle-Day Poetry Center, whose mission seeks to address ongoing inequity in the publishing world by providing a platform for systematically excluded voices. Bashir's book is beautiful to read and hold, and I'm so excited to celebrate the beginning of what I am sure will be a strong future for 9 Syllables Press. More information is in the booth in the back. If you would like to stay up to date with Poetry Center events and are not yet on our mailing list, you can sign up at the QR code at the table beside Broadside Books in the little atrium area. Students and auditors in my class, 112 students. The QR codes for tonight's attendance will be posted. There's one posted now to sign in, and at the end of the reading, there'll be another one to kind of sign out. If you have any trouble with those, our wonderful and intrepid TA, Emma Berver, will be there to help you. Okay, let's get started. I'm coming into this role. Jennifer and Matt run a really tight ship. And despite them going like, here's who you're introducing, I got confused. So I'm gonna do my best. I believe that I am now introducing M. That's what I'm doing, see? Very good, okay, thank you. All that time in front of the mirror really mattered, you know? So M. Judkins is a queer filmmaker and poet based in central and western Massachusetts, an administrator for the Northampton Literary Society. They were a runner-up for the Rosemary Thomas Poetry Prize and have received the Ruth Forbes Elliott Prize, the Ethel Olin Corbin Prize, and the Elizabeth Drew Essay Prize for a paper in Gina's class, is that right? Heck yeah. Okay. They graduated from Smith College in May of this past year with a bachelor's degree in English and film and media studies, and their work has appeared in Emulate, Voices and Visions, and at the Worcester Art Museum. They're at work on their first chapbook. We're so grateful to Em for coming up and doing this introductory work, and let's get started. Let's welcome Em.
Hi, everybody. I'm so grateful to be here, and thank you for joining us, whether you're in person or online or watching this in the future. Tonight, we have the incredible honor and pleasure to hear the remarkable Torrin A. Greathouse read. If we could have another round of applause for them. I'm so excited. All right. Greathouse's highly anticipated poetry collection, Deed, destroyed me in the best way possible. A triptych of desire. Deed begins with T for T and ends with crip for crip, carving a space where queer, disabled pleasure is held fiercely and interrogated fearlessly. These opening and closing poems usher readers towards entangled hope, where we may celebrate riot laughter, redrafted anatomy, sway and swish, making do ourselves, and making toast with acetaminophen bought in bulk. Where, in her electric debut collection, Wound from the Mouth of a Wound, selfhood and pleasure is often subject to traumatic erasure, Deed's readers are subject to desire's many heads, its burdens, its comforts, its violence, its ecstasy, and its labor. In an interview with magazine A Velvet Giant, Greathouse describes how any form is an architecture of meaning, and that forms and their subversions, perversions create a kind of shadow box with tradition, history, and myth. With each form she employs, whether it be a Caudet sonnet or a cleaved tanka, Greathouse makes a project out of exploring how meaning often arrives out of violent languages or forms. This inventiveness is something that is so dear to me about Greathouse's work. In my mouth is the mouth of a river, a burning haibun, which is a really cool form that she created. Greathouse writes, language is a slick-tongued thing, how you can say thirst and mean instead desire, and later redacts this line into language is a slick and mean desire. This act of erasure enables new images and meanings to arrive out of erasure, something so often seen as violent, yet at times necessary, to gut the glamour of early self-mythologization, such as call me siren, nymph of the pavement, and cut to the core of the poem. This form, and perhaps the collection, ask what arrives when we break down language to its blood? What language do we put to the deeds necessary for one's survival, specifically at the intersections of trans-disabled life? As she writes in I Want to Write Honest Poem About Desire, quote, I don't know how to talk about lust without also talking about violence. And what Deed does is push toward unreasonable joy with great care and precision that is characteristic of all of Greathouse's writing. For as many cheeky lines as Swiss Army Clit TMR, there is so often a deep ache or confession waiting, of admitting there's no language I'm safe inside of. That balance in interweaving of bombastic confidence and brutal honesty feels so necessary while navigating the world as a trans person, especially in a time of increased anti-trans legislation and violence. And I honestly could not be more grateful for this collection right now. And I could go on and on and on about this book, but instead we have Torrin and Greathouse in the building with us tonight. In addition to Deed, they received the 2022 Kate Tufts Discovery Award for their debut collection, Wound from the Mouth of a Wound, and fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Effing Foundation for Sex Positivity, Zooglasia, and more. She earned her MFA in creative writing from the University of Minnesota and currently teaches at the Rayner Writing Workshop, the low residency MFA program at Pacific Lutheran University. So please put your hands together for the incredible, amazing, show-stopping Torrin A. Greathouse.
Hi, y'all. Can you hear me okay? All right, so I'm a deeply anxious person. I am not good at the whole banter thing, at least until I get going. I'm going to open by reading the epigraphs that begin the book, and then the first poem. Go on, whatever crown you have to raise, I have only these two hands with which to praise. Meg Day. This is the only kingdom, the kingdom of touching. Araceli Skirmine. Also, y'all don't have to be quiet. You can get kind of loud. You can cheer, you can clap, you can snap. If I say a really good line, you can tell me to go fuck myself. I come from slam, I'm not tender about it. But I would like for this room to be loud. College readings are sometimes very quiet, and let's throw that away. Start the season off strong. T for tea. And for folks who don't know, T for tea comes from originally Craigslist. It means trans for trans, something that has been kind of reclaimed by the trans community. T for tea. There is no known root for how the word come came to mean what it does. But imagine if you could stitch a lineage back to the Latin come, meaning to step, hence movement, hence a destination, the body moving, perhaps dancing toward a kind of end, vanishing point of flesh, trembling tongue, fucked apocalyptic. Apocalypsis, a veil shifted, and what awaits beneath a rose by any other given name could still draw blood if it wanted. But shit, turns out there's no emoji for a rubber dick. Sat heavy on the tongue, go figure. I can still feel it twitch. Hold it in my mouth, spit slick, apocrypha, sweet faggot magic, the way we speak organs out of their Christian names. Lick cock to clit, bruise breast to flatten chest, bury knuckles inside a redrafted anatomy. Sucked finger shudder, lust hot alchemy holy. How even the air becomes wind when moving, holy. How you fuck me by my one unburied name. And when I tell you how beautiful you are, you riot laughter. Kiss me and call me a dyke. Your smile arrives, day bright, unburdens that slur of all its blood. There's a fascinating lighting situation happening up here, so I'm kind of having to move the book to avoid all of the shadows. All right, so this poem is one that Em mentioned in that wonderful introduction, and it is a burning haibun. So every time I snap, Imagine that the poem is burning. My mouth is the mouth of a river. Language is a slick-tongued thing. How you can say thirst and mean instead desire. But hasn't language always led the mouth back to what fills it? Between the teeth, there's a dozen paths to every meaning. Do you follow? I can say the oldest profession and mean I've made a living in the currency of hunger, a career of making my body into water, that I have heard so many names moaned into my ear and none of them are mine. I suck a man's cock and it tastes of copper. He comes until empty and I feel coins clinking inside me. My body laments no guilt, except for my mother's shame, though she does not know it. At night, I've pulled their memories up like pills lodged in the throat, which my body will not spasm away. Each false name I've been fed, rising on the crook of my finger, damp and dissolving, a palm full of luminous silt. Men are selfish with the truth, but each is clever as a cleaver. See, every name hinges on the J, Jeff, Jack, James, the simple sidestep from a name known best as client and baptismal. There are at least 100 words for how I have survived, and so many of their names lead back to water. Call me siren, nymph of the pavement. We were taught desire is a flame, but it is instead a river. When I was starving, I opened my mouth and said, drink. Language is a slick and mean desire. Between the teeth, there is a profession in the currency of hunger, a career of making a man's empty coins inside my body. Lament for my mother's shame I've lodged in my throat. False name I've been fed, my damp and luminous self. See, every name hinges on the simple sidestep. How I've survived their desires' flame. There's currency in empty men. I fed myself on their desire. All right, so this book is structured as a triptych mirror. If y'all have ever been in a bathroom with one of those 3-panel mirrors, you know how the sides kind of reflect each other, the middle is sort of doing its own thing. That's the structure of this book. And in this way, poems from the first and third section speak to each other. So I'm going to read one of those pairs to kind of show you what I mean. Abad beginning in handcuffs. Sometimes I pronounce obad, obeyed, for the way this particular desire stumbles the tongue. Hunger's vocabulary is a fickle thing. How many lovers have said that they adore me, but meant instead they saw in me a door? Language shifts an image like the light. To lash can mean both beat and bind. I'm lashed against the bed by dawn's red blaze. The whole room welted tidy by the sky between the blinds. To cuff can also mean to hold or harm. Each word doubled body and a body's shadow. I want, and all at once I flicker beneath you. I beg you to bruise me and so exchange faggot for fruit. Oh, how gentle lust alters a body, conjugates prey into prayer. The history of handcuffs is old as myth, if memory serves. The legend goes, a Greek hero invented them to steal prophecy from the mouth of a shapeshifter god, and the story gathered blood from there. The root of the word religion is a Latin verb meaning to bind, as in the worshiper is bound to their God, two hands paired in steel or prayer. When I say obey, I mean we have chosen the softer side of every verb, dulled the sharp edge of a memory, sea glass against the tongue. For the first time, when the handcuffs steel lips unkiss my wrists, as morning stains every surface, a fading bruise, I am already free as the first breath after confession. So that poem gestures to several poems in the last section of the book, which deal with the fact that almost a decade ago now, I was arrested for driving under the influence. And because I am trans, I was jailed and held in solitary confinement for an amount of time I have still been unable to identify. And the fact that these experiences, all of the things I've put as little mementos in my book are falling out because I'm not used to this book. The old book is so replete with mementos that nothing falls anymore. This poem borrows a form from a poem by a dear friend of mine. And so this borrows from Julian Randall's poem, Pre-Game Prayer with Complete Citations. It is a prayer and then annotations to that prayer. And I'll read first the prayer and then the prayer with annotations. Serenity prayer with complete citation. Lord, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Lord, name I'm taught to gift to any higher power. Prayer by way of substitution, I lord you, survival, future girl, unopened bottle, rent check, I don't vanish first into the gut and then the drain light, caught over a mist-tongued horizon that looks, I imagine, like the inside of a wedding veil, pale glow, the opposite of a fluorescent, antonym of whitewashed concrete, antonym of perspex doors shuttered shut. Grant me the serenity I never believed I would build from a room I was backed into. Court order that kept me breathing. I don't want to give them credit for this, as if the memory of that night hasn't also almost killed me. To accept the things I cannot change, the sentence, the angle of the collision, eyes drifting shut behind the wheel, the number I called, the way the number changed the second time they breathalyzed me, when the first time I blew clean, how they rewrote the contents of my blood, how the booking officer refused me water for hours, how he stared at my painted nails, at my painted lips, mouthed faggot under his breath, how the shift ended and he logged his overtime. The courage to change the things I can. I know that spite too can be a kind of God. I'm 8 years sober, still learning not to panic when left alone in white rooms. I see a cop car a block away and my ears start to ring like a bronze AA token flipped through the air. I keep walking, like doing this, while trans couldn't get me questioned, cuffed, detained again. And the wisdom to know the difference. Truth is, I don't know of any proper antonym for jail. Hence, my faith is an absence, my higher power, an unfilled mouth. A prayer is not that which leaves my tongue, but that which I do not allow to enter me. Salvation is whatever word means I will not return here. Amen. There is only one word that means the opposite of jail, and it is outside. The first breath of open air. I walked out of a cell painted how I was told I should imagine heaven, and every new place my feet touched was holy ground. This next poem is also borrowing a form from a dear friend of mine. This is a thread that runs through this whole book, that the forms of these poems often hold the people dearest to me. So this form was invented by the poet George Abraham. It is called the Markov sonnet. So does anyone in the room know what a Markov probability chain is? Okay, so I'm gonna guess you probably know better than I do. So if I butcher, tell me after. As I understand it, a Markov probability chain is a chain of causal events wherein event A causes event B causes event C, but there is not a direct causational chain between event A and C. Does that make sense? Did I do all right? Fuck yeah. All right, so this is a sonnet that does that. By which I mean it is 14 lines cycling in 3-line chunks. So 2 lines only show up once, and all of the other lines will repeat. As my English class debates the legality of gay marriage, I daydream of the boy I am beginning to fall in love with. My mouth is all wrong answers. I know what happens if I speak and vanish the question marks on every slur. I dream his lips against mine, chapped, red as an exit. I speak and vanish the question marks on every slur. I dream his lips against mine, chapped red as an exit. He still calls himself straight even after we fuck. I dream his lips against mine, chapped red as an exit. He still calls himself straight even after we fuck, and I vanish in his bed. Years later, I'll prove him right. He still calls himself straight. After we fuck in his bed, I vanish. Years later, I prove him right. Unfaggot his past, the first girl to redden his sheets. I vanish in his bed. Years later, I'll prove him right. Unfaggot his past, the first girl I redden his sheets. Still he calls me boy in my half-buried name. His unfaggoted past, the first girl to redden his sheets. Still he calls me boy in my half-buried name. My body always center stage, the subject of debate. Still, he calls me boy and half-buried. My name, my body, always center stage, the subject of debate. This is not a metaphor, though I wish it was. My body is always center stage, the subject of debate. This is not a metaphor, though I wish it was. The wedding band, that night, thin bruise of gold. This is not a metaphor, though I wish it was. The wedding band, a night thin bruise of gold, a promise we know we can't keep making. The wedding band, a night thin bruise of gold, promise we know we can't keep making brides of each other nightly and divorcing in the sun. A promise we know we can't keep making brides of each other nightly and divorcing in the sun. We all know the score. One of these boys must die. Brides to each other nightly, divorced in the sun. We know the score. One of these boys must die. No one in this poem would even recognize my face. All right, so if I remember things going on in the sky above us decently. There's supposed to be a total solar eclipse happening sometime soon. Is it next year? Anyways, they're always happening somewhere. So this poem comes from a story of driving across the country to see a solar eclipse. Awful trip, largely awful people, don't recommend it, did get a good poem out of it though. In praise of the rim job, we once drove 900 miles from California to Idaho in a borrowed car, the dead drench of summer slicking our skin with its own salt to witness an eclipse's totality. The darkened sun, the sky punched through, we barely made it, but did, on duct tape and faith. Bear with me. I know how easy it is to forget a journey for all its destinations. We, trans and crippled and visible as crosshairs, cross 5 state lines to see the convenient mechanism of the day break down. But what we couldn't have expected was the darkness. Jay blue deepened to false dusk, and night jars split into song, how the moon remade the palace of the sky. The air still but cold as autumn breeze, a corona is a crown, but also the light that reads a punctured star. Each solar flare, frayed nerve endings of decaying brightness, a confession. Even as the heavens glimmered apocalyptic, my first thought was of a lover. Thighs horizoned across a mattress, body tongued as if it were the Eucharist. Lips pressed to this fleshy crown that canonizes the saint of my tongue. Ring of fire, tiny halo, slot in the confessional door. I am inclined to call this holy. Skin muffled blasphemy, wet and near silent prayer. Actually have more time than I thought. So let's see. Okay, this one's a sestina. Sestinas are fucking hard. I will never write one again because sestinas are fucking hard. For folks who don't know, a sestina, these 6-line stanzas, there are 6 words at the end of each, there's a word at the end of each line that is called a teleuton. Those repeat, and then the order in which those words repeats changes, but all of the lines carry across those words until the end, when you have a 3-line stanza. Each one of those lines has 2 of those words. They're a pain in the ass. And because I'm the kind of person I am, I wrote this in a program for this lovely journal called Mixed. And what Mixed does, they have a proprietary software that records your writing process as a time lapse. So if you like this poem, you can go watch a time lapse of me writing it. Because unfortunately, I am the exact kind of person I am. And this poem borrows its title from an old poem of Sam Sax's, which I don't know if Sam even remembers having written. It's blood that makes men hard. The question, whose blood makes this a threat? Set the scene. First act. Men catcall me daily, even behind a mask. I'm raw meat. Something to soften, beat until the blood throbs inside of them. No. I won't let this be the answer. No man's lust is dangerous enough to stitch a thread of fear through my blood. It's comical, the way that these men act. One messages me, says he wants to beat despite his profile, which reads mask for mask. Gay men treat trans girls no better than any common straggot. They beatify us till they don't. I'm always a saint or a threat. Always more fetish than attraction. My body's edges bleed like ink, like skin, beadwork of rubies, dry blood, a necklace of rusty pearls. The night masks a man who follows me, and G for blocks, shouts slurs. We act like we can't hear. The street is busy, but no one helps. Every day is another threat. This violence comes on cue, on beat. A man beats off to me, tells me to slit my wrists, to drain my blood in the bathroom sink, my beauty, a threat to the sugar glass of his masculinity. Men like him, I know, desire me in the dark, in public, react as if their hunger doesn't exist. It's all an act. They play out beat by beat by beating. I'd be lying if I said no man ever battered out my blood to prove himself razor straight. Tired masquerade that's always threatening collapse. I won't act my part, won't spill my blood for the poem beat tableau. Audiences, mascara streaming. This is not a poem, it's a cut thread. Trying to decide, I think I have time to do 3 more, and I have only marked the pages for 2 of those. So we're gonna decide something on the fly. Yeah, fuck it. Sure. Sorry, I have got to be averaging a very high amount of fuck it's per actual word. But I don't know if I mentioned at the beginning of this. This is the first actual full reading for this book, so I'm very excited to be here. And this also means that I have no idea how to arrange a set for this book yet. So y'all are getting a very rough draft. My apologies. All right, so the title of this poem is a term that means, okay, how many of y'all have encountered the etymology of shit, meaning ship high in transit? Okay, so that's fake. That's some bullshit someone made up. And that is an etymology or folk etymology. This is an etymology that has been repeated enough to be accepted, but is not actually true. It has no bearing on the truth. Anyways, this is a poem about how I figured out that in the course of my transition, I am butch and like not a particularly girly girl. Etymology. I spent the beginning of my life wrong, in the wrong direction. Was called a boy thing with a girlish manner when I meant to be a girl or girl-ish, just manlier. But I had no language for this. Perhaps I mean to mean I once believed etymology could also exist in flesh. My face, a hand-me-down memory, an echo. I was wrong. I look nothing like my mother. Each day this grows more true. Some words can't be traced back far enough to root out where they began. Consider faggot, butch, dike. Sometimes if a drought is bad enough, a river can lose its source. Would you believe me if I told you that boy and girl are also of such uncertain histories, a tangle of dust and tongues? What I said earlier was a half-lie. We know how butch slipped its way into signifying manliness by way of knife and blood and outlaw myth, Cassidy, butcher, and a legend that grew around his gun. What we can't trace is how it toppled into a queer lexicon. I mean, the morning after my first pride when I spat the sink full of glitter and pink-tinged toothpaste, I felt like a miracle or metaphor. Dressed in second-hand flannel, my gums shredded, and last night's dress splayed across the floor. Femme is a mechanism of survival. Smoke screen shadow and liner thorns. just beautiful enough to vanish in a crowd, to make myself less of a target. I never wanted it, though. I came by butch dishonestly, by way of verb, not noun, gender, performance I'm always butchering. Girly as hot pink scar tissue, my girlhood scraped together from 50s love songs and spit-shined boots, blue jeans, Springsteen, duct tape, punk rock, and bruised jeweled knuckles. I'm clocked by etymology, by the way even stilettos take their name from a knife, the way a knife well honed can strip anything to the bone. Bear with me. Sometimes even the myths grow blurry in the distance. The root of Artemis, goddess of the hunt, is still unknown, but likely comes from Artamos, butcher. Let's call this a kind of etymythology. Post hoc history, let's call Artemis the root. For her wild heart, her failed femininity, goddess of gender-fucked girls, crooked prayer. The word worship is shaped from two shards, meaning worth and its giving. A mouth gives faith a shape like clay. I mean, to pray is to God a god. To be butch and butcher the myth of a son was to make a goddess of myself. Ooh, you can tell I haven't done this in a while because my voice is getting kind of hoarse. All right, so long one, short one, conversation, book signing done. All right, so this is from a series of longer poems in the book, and all of these are on something. This one kind of responds to a poem in my first book, which is about the kind of struggle of being a medical mystery in the eyes of doctors, and is about kind of figuring out what's wrong with me, but not really, but kind of, and trying to deal with that through poetry. On possession. Oh, sorry, also let me specifically warn this one, because I know this can be a tough one. This does discuss seizures, frankly. Sorry. On possession. Our earliest understanding of seizures was that they must be the devil possessing the sick. At the onset of my condition, the doctors were convinced it must be epilepsy, kept me for a week bedridden and wired to their machines. Epilepsy, from the Greek epi, upon, and lamvenein, to take hold, the body snatched away from itself. My first seizure was not like this. Instead, voltage in my blood, my body draped in wind, in wings, in nets and veils of heatless light. Sometimes, I think I must be a bad feminist. The days that all I want to be is owned, an object, a possession. An apostrophe denotes possession, means to turn toward, thin hook of ink that joins one body to another by its name. Small black latch that clicks the distance between two things shut. Most days, my pink leather collar collects dust in a closet. Though once I wore it daily, marked territories, familiar weight. Though once a dom made me wear it out in a dive bar's dim light to read poems for tips, and I bruised my throat from the force of speaking. For weeks after, my voice was choked with ghost palms, padlock caught in my throat. Once, the common practice for treating patients in the midst of seizing was to force a piece of wood between their teeth to prevent them from biting through their tongues. Epilepsy shares a common root with latch. Thus, the lock and band, the collar and cuffs and trap door of a mouth, cousins to illness. The doctor tells me this is not epilepsy, but a cousin illness. Misfiring nervous system, shocked and baring teeth. Certain kinds of seizure are categorized by the feeling of euphoria that overtakes the body when you return to it. I first knew to call these seizures from the dead light they left behind. My lover tells me they have heard the voice of God since before they understood human speech. And this is how I know we are thunder-blooded in the same way. The seizure, a kind of theft. Speech stolen from the tip of my tongue. I wake from sudden darkness, and words topple from my mouth, unhinged from their tangled meanings. Back against the floor, my tongue babbles a tower skyward. Sometimes I hear voices in the darkness. Sometimes I hear my love reaching for me as if through water, even from 1,000 miles away. The same lover told me that the distance between orgasm and seizure is thin as a split lip's skin, the body overtaken by itself, but there's something different in being trembled by another's hand. Their hand, a hook, and a name. Possession, a mark of sin, of course, an invitation. I give myself over, and this must be a deviled thing, a dirty prayer. If a nun has wed the Lord, pray tell, what strange marriage is this? To be bridled is to be held, but contains within it bride. Could be confused for bridal. They hold me through a seizure or pin me to the bed, fingers a bit inside my mouth. I am wed to their hands. All right, last poem. This poem mirrors the first poem in the book, which is T for Tea. This is Sick for Sick. It's very strange to read from this book, a book so replete with love poems for someone who I am no longer with. Like, too late in the process of the book being published to change anything, or to say, like, what if we don't? But there's something beautiful in that. A time capsule of that love, and also the way that these poems have become containers for all of the other people I love. And so this is a poem that, even though it's very much about a single person, is also just a poem about love and the way I love. Sick for Sick. I think my lover's cane is sexy. The way they walk, like a rainstorm, stumble slow across the landscape, how, with fingers laced together, our boots and canes click in time, unsteady rhythm of a metronome's limp wrist, all sway and swish. First person I ever saw walk with a lisp. Call this our love language of unspokens. We share so many symptoms. The first time we thought to hyphenate our names was, playfully, to christen ourselves a new disorder. We trade tips on medication, on how to weather which prescriptions make you sick to maybe make you well. We make toasts with acetaminophen bought in bulk, kiss in the airport terminal through surgical masks, rub knots from each other's backs. We dangle fall risk bracelets from our walls and call it decoration. We visit another ER and call it a date. When we are sick, again, for months, with a common illness that will not leave, it is not the doctors who care for us. We make do ourselves. At night, long after the sky has darkened in, something like a 3-day bruise, our bodies are fever sweat stitched, a chimera, shadow puppet of our lust bones, bowed into a new beast with 2 backs, 6 legs of metal and flesh and carbon fiber beside my love. I find I can't remember any prayers. So I whisper the names of our medications like the names of saints, orange bottles scattered around the mattress like unlit candles in the dark. Thank you.
We have to hold these in order to be.
Okay, yeah. Hello. Are we beginning the conversation portion? Okay.
Just checking this. Okay, cool. This one's
Yes.
working too.
Can we get another round of applause for Torrin? So that was fabulous. I don't think I'm alone in thinking this, saying this, and I wanted to begin with a question about form, but I think I want to begin actually with a question about the mouth after that delightfully juicy reading. And so, I know that this is the kind of debut of the first book, or the second book, Deed. And I'm thinking about actually the title of the first book in relationship to this book, right? Which is Wound from the Mouth of a Wound. And I want to think about or ask you more about the relationship between the terms wound and mouth across these collections. Both of these terms I feel like are very prominent, right, in both of these books. I'm thinking of the symbol and myth of the Ouroboros, which is very, I feel like it begins the first poem of the first book, right? And I'm also thinking, after those beautiful readings, the relationship of sickness to desire and hunger, right? As we, concluded so beautifully on Sick for Sick. So can you speak a little bit about the mouth, the wound, and the relationship between?
So it's one of those things where I'm like, well, there's the honest answer, there's the glib answer. I think the glib answer, right, is to think about, in art history, right, we so often, especially in medieval European art, we see the wound on Christ's side depicted as a yonic form. Essentially, wound is vagina. And so, in some ways, I am always thinking about that and, the way in which, the wound, the mouth, the act of sex itself, it's holes all the way down. And so as a deeply traumatized person, I am always thinking about puncta, which is the more academic way of saying a hole is a hole is a hole. Which, wild that I'm saying that on stage. I love my job. Yeah. But, I think in a lot of ways, it's hard for me to separate out. I am always thinking about language. Mouth is container for language. I am always thinking about violence, wound as product of violence, I'm always thinking about the way language can produce violence. And thus, there is a direct line between wound and mouth, like an Ouroboros, in which the wound and the mouth enclose as one. They're inseparable. And I think in approaching this book, but a little, but especially the first book, I was thinking about the ways in which language as a tool for me it's inseparable from violence, because even the first people I learned language from are also the same sources of the violences I write about. And so in that, I think, and to go to the title, Wound from the Mouth of a Wound, in that first poem, so a lot of people don't realize this in mythology. So Medusa is killed by Perseus, her blood spills and rolls into the river Hippocrene. And then the mixture of that blood and that blessed water becomes the Pegasus, which later helps another hero kill other monsters which probably were not deserving of that death. And so in this, I am also thinking about how is my mother's trauma the origin of my trauma? What here is epigenetic? What here is passed down in the way that unless we spend our whole lives on this struggle, we replicate the violences of our families. And so wound from the mouth of a wound in that moment is asking, am I this thing made from my mother's blood? Am I just another wound in a lineage of wounds?
Wound as inheritance, So the next question, I feel like is very related to this discussion of wounding, right? Language as violence. And this in particular is a question about the burning haibun, which is a form that you invented. And I'm gonna do a little bit of context for the audience who may not know about the haibun form. So a haibun is typically, it's a form that's associated with nature, travel, journeying, right? The poet Amy Nezuko Matado described it as, how do you travel without getting lost? Typically, there's a chunky prose poem section, and then there's a haiku, right? So it looks like, the poem often looks like a little cake stand, right? The kind of chunky prose block on top of the little haiku cake stand. And the burning haibun is an adaptation of this form that uses erasure as a formal strategy. And instead of thinking about external landscape, right? It's about the internal fragmented landscape, the landscape fragmented by trauma, right? And in the burning haibun, the haiku portion is derived through erasure, right? So the haiku is derived by erasing or blacking out portions of the prose poem. And Torrin Greathouse invented this modification of the form. Many poets have taken it up. And I'm really interested in the poetic tactic of erasure and what it means to kind of react to, or respond, I should say, respond to a wound with more wound, right? Particularly in a cultural context when people, I feel like, are so obsessed with healing and self-healing, right?
So, I think the biggest thing for me, I never expected that poem to be, I never expected it to be a form. It was a poem, and that was supposed to be it. And then I liked it, and I wrote another one. And then I wrote another one, and another one. So there's 2 in the first book, there's 2 in this book. And at a certain point, I was like, oh no, people are also starting to write these, and I probably need to come up with some rules or reasoning. Because at first, it's a bad pun. It's a poem about my relationship to alcoholism, familial trauma, and queerness because of the history of addiction in queer communities. It's a poem that blacks out, like me.
Yeah.
And so then I had to, and for everyone in the crowd, anytime you see an artist doing something brilliant and they explain how they did this brilliant thing, they're probably lying. Because 90% of the time we come up with how we did it after the fact. At the time, we are just stumbling through the dark. And so I will
Super
say,
convincing, yeah.
you know, I think about the gaps and dissonances created in memory. And for me, yes, the act is erasure, but I am thinking about how to create on the page for a reader the same kinds of gaps and dissonances, the blackouts, the burning aways that are inherent to my internal landscape. To render something more perfect that does not, in some ways, destroy itself feels disingenuous, particularly to the material that these poems cover. Yeah, and I think also in some ways I am thinking about what it means as a writer to use what is fundamentally a device of state violence. You know, this is something Solmaz Sharif talks about quite a lot, although from having talked to her, she does not believe in a lot of the things she espoused in her early essays about that, which is a shame, because I still believe everything she said. But I was thinking about what it means to turn that tool on my own words. Because I don't, in my own work, I cannot see the use of the erasure as a political tool when applied to other texts. To me, that is then rendering of violence.
Right.
But if you make something to burn it and then burn it, it's no longer tool abuse. You are using the tool as intended.
Right, yes.
And so the first one of these, speaking of stumbling through the dark, I arrived at the haiku purely through erasure. Now when I write them, the haiku is the first thing, then I write the prose. So if you've tried to write one of these and had a hard time, that's the trick, is to lie. Yeah, I hope that kind of answers.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so if you try this out at home, start with a haiku first. So I have another question about another burning haibun. I think it's in this, indeed. And it contains the line, you taught me that the best way to kill something and to name it a nature is to set it ablaze.
That's in the first book.
Yeah, okay, sorry. That was in the first book. So I'm really interested in the use of unnature instead of unnatural, especially given the use of environmental and natural imagery to describe the body in that collection of poems, and especially given the association of the haibun with nature, right? So if the haibun is a nature poem, then what is an unnature poem?
I love that question. And I don't know that I have an answer for what is an unnature poem. I mean, I think within kind of an Enlightenment thinking sense, that any poem purely about humans is an unnature poem, but we don't subscribe to that trash here. Humans are animals, just like any other animal. We eat, we shit, we die on planet Earth. We are animals. And yeah, so I don't know. This is something I am actually thinking about with a book that I mentioned at dinner, Pray for Rain, which I will one day maybe write or finish writing. Because something I'm interested in for that project is, well, what does it mean to move in the opposite direction of writing a nature poem? If I do believe that all of this is nature, like this is nature right now, but it is nature we have shaped.
Yes.
And that might not be a good shape, but it is nature. In that poem, though, purely sonically motivated. Unnature sounded better than unnatural. The scansion of it.
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't like that last syllable, so I just threw it away. And never expected anyone to ask a question about
I know,
it,
and
so
now,
thank you.
And now I'm here just poring over that decision. It's like this one time when I reproduced a passage for my students to analyze, and I accidentally included a typo, and a student kind of latched onto that word, and I was like, oh no, I typed it out wrong. I'm sorry, there's no hidden meaning there.
I always feel so bad when you have to do that, because
Yeah.
it's like they came up with good analysis
Yes.
that can't work.
I know. It's not their fault, it's the typo, you know? So I want to kind of widen the lens a little bit and ask more generally about form. And there's this line from the poem, I want to write an honest poem about desire, which is, I know it's part of the new collection. And the line is, every time a body like mine enters a poem, it threatens to turn that poem into nothing more than an equation. And I really love this line so much. And it does compel me to think mathematically, which I feel like my mind was brought to again with the Markov sonnet. Is that the form? And so, you know, if we think about poems as a type of mathematics, I think about how, you know, the burning haibun is a form that operates on the principle of subtraction, of erasure. I'm also thinking about the Caudet sonnet, which is another form that you use, and how it functions on the principle of addition. So you add like a coda or a tail, right, to the sonnet's 14 lines. And then I think about your own reflections on the kind of contrapuntal poem, which sort of visually looks like an equation. And in preparing for this conversation, I watched a couple of your interviews, which I enjoyed immensely. But I remember you cited the disability scholar Jim Ferris and his own writings on poetics, and he talks about enjambment and the line, quote, limping down the page, which I think is just such a wonderful description of what I might describe as like a disability or crip poetics, right? And so I'm wondering if you could speak a bit to your kind of adaptations of poetic forms. So we talked a little bit about the haibun already, but I'm also thinking about the sonnet and the aubade. And these are genres that deal with love and lovers, right? So do the forms need to change their own equations, right? When you're holding the pen.
Yeah, I actually want to chime back to something that Em quoted of mine in their introduction, and that is the idea that form is an architecture of meaning. And I mean a couple of things by this. First, I mean that the form itself, the kind of technical shape of it, shapes the thoughts that it can contain. A sonnet must have a volta.
Yes.
So whatever you're saying has to have a turn in it. Forms that include repetition and cyclicality fundamentally have to be about things that are cyclical and repeating. So we often see, you know, sestinas or villanelles or pantoum that are about obsession or trauma or, you know, reoccurring historical events. And so these are ways in which the form literally shapes the meaning we can put into it, hence architecture. The other is that no form, when we arrive to it, is an empty room. What I mean by this is every poetic form, unless we invent it whole cloth, pulling from nothing and no tradition, which I do not think is possible to do, because we are all constantly pulling from our individual and collective canons. There is a way in which we meet the poem with its own rhetorical and historic baggage. You know, when you see a sonnet, sonnets have these themes that they tend to gravitate around. Courtly love, nature, death. And so what this does, which is kind of beautiful, is it means if we arrive to a form as a container that already has things within it, then we get to play with the old tenant's furniture. So when I write a sonnet, I am thinking about its historical baggage. And one way that I do that in this book is taking a caudate sonnet and saying, okay, well, what does it mean to write a sonnet about my mother's failed marriage? This is the inverse of the love, but then also to have that turn in the final line where it goes from being a poem about my mother's failed marriage to being a poem about the necklace with my mother's ring hanging into a lover's mouth, and that changing the meaning of the object. And so these are all things I'm thinking about as I approach form. I love the idea of it as a kind of mathematical structure, although I don't think I ever arrive at that when I am writing, because I will admit, the reason I am up here on this stage, the reason I am a poet, is because I was too bad at math to be an astrophysicist, which was the dream. I really wanted to be an astrophysicist, and it turns out you have to be able to do math for that, which was a real pisser.
Do we have time for one more question, do you think? A short one, okay. So I want to know a little bit more about the book ending of Deed with T for T and Sick for Sick.
As I was thinking about this structure, I knew before that ever happened that I wanted the book to be this kind of triptych. And then I was like, well, I have these two poems, which are two aspects of love. And I remember with the first book trying really hard to resist making the ending too happy. You know, because I think there is market pressure to have that kind of resolved, click-shut ending. So it's like, okay, let me complicate that by making it a poem that does have a fairly positive ending and message, but that you have to become aware of your body as a reader to consume. Because that poem, for people who have not read the first book, is printed such that you need to read it in a mirror to be able to read it. So there's that. And I was thinking, like, okay, well, what does it maybe look like to say, no, I'll lean into ending somewhere happy. Say, there is so much pain in this book, let me give you something to leave on. And I love the idea of a book beginning and ending with love. Like, it might be a book that is about lust and violence and carceral systems and medical systems, but in spite of all of that, it is a book about love and desire. And so I knew that that was how I wanted to begin and end it, in love.
And I feel like that's a beautiful way to end this conversation, right? Thank you.
Thank you both so much for that wonderful conversation. Torrin will be signing books right down here in the front. Please come join. There are books for sale from Broadside Books in the back. Thank you all for being here. What a wonderful evening. Let's give one more round of applause. Thank you so much. And we'll hope to see you at another reading soon.